everybody. Welcome to Frankenstein Tea. This is an afternoon program through the Island Free Library. My name is Kristen. I'm the director of the Island Free Library, and I welcome you. Welcome back if you're a returning Frankenstein Tea listener, and welcome if it's your first time. Frankenstein Tea is a chance for us to sit together and I get to say hello to you and connect with you, and you get to keep connected to our library. Maybe have a sip of something. Mine is coffee. I don't know why it's coffee. It just seemed quicker. I've been in a little bit of a rush this morning. Hold on, let me shut that so you don't hear that. Okay. So Frankenstein Tea is a check-in, a timeout, a moment to do a little self-check of yourself. How's your day going? How are you feeling today? Have you taken care of yourself today? Do you have a plan to take care of yourself later tonight? I read to you. The Frankenstein name is a reference to this monster of a disease, monster of a time, also to what's a sort of a permissible, copyrighted, allowable read. I don't always do that, but I've come to understand this time in librarianship as being, there's some breadth there. That we actually can have programs like this, and publishing houses and authors are allowing this, and this is permissible. So that's what Frankenstein Tea is about in a little bit of a nutshell. And I do read adult stories. So, if this isn't a good time for an adult story in your house, if you have kids or something else going on, watch it anytime. It's up on this YouTube channel. It will be there. They're organized into playlists. You can see them if you explore our YouTube channel. All the Frankenstein Tea sit together. Miss Morgan's family read-alouds do. Music time, which was great fun this morning. There was a couple of great tunes in music time. So, head to music time for that. And as I say that, I would encourage everyone to to check out all the programming that we're able to do through these platforms. They're definitely age specific, but we have found that people of all ages are enjoying all programs. So that's pretty fun. I'm going to read some today. The name of this collection is called Fires, Essays, Poems, and Stories by Raymond Carver. He was referenced from yesterday's book, the Murakami book, is one of the great, Murakami writes the introduction to this collection that I read from yesterday, which I'll read from again. That was a great story, and I know my mom loved it. So, we'll read another one of those. But I was curious about Raymond Carver. In the introduction, he references him as one of the greats, and he's often called one of the greats. And we had a Raymond Carver book in our collection. And this, the Boston Globe, this is old, right? So this is Raymond Carver. This is called Fires. This is, this edition is 1984. It was first copyrighted in 1968. This is a Vintage Books edition. I don't know who the first copyright was. Maybe it was Vintage Books too. So, I'm not sure if I think he's one of the greats, but, just again, an insight into librarianship is like, I don't always have to like it, right? It's not about everything that I want to read. I buy books for what my patrons would like to read. Sometimes they mesh. So, let's see what you think about this one. I'm interested. Let me know what you think. Fires, Essays, Poems, Stories, Raymond Carver. This story, and I wasn't sure which one I was going to read, but I think I'm going to read this. Maybe we'll read from him again. Maybe something will settle with me here and we'll read again. This short story is called Harry's Death. Mexico. 3 months later. Everything has changed since Harry's death. Being down here, for instance, who'd have thought it? Only 3 short months ago that I'd be down here in Mexico, and poor Harry dead and buried? Harry? Dead and buried? But not forgotten. I couldn't go to work that day when I got the news. I was just too torn up. Jack Berger, who was the fender and body man at Frank's Custom Repair, where we all work, called me at 6:30 a.m. as I was having a cup of coffee and a cigarette before sitting down to breakfast. Harry's dead, he said, just like that, dropping the bomb. Turn on your radio, he said. Turn on your TV. The police had just left his house after asking Jack a lot of questions about Harry. They told him to come down right away and identify the body. Jack said they'd probably come to my place next. Why they went to Jack Berger's place first is a mystery to me, since he and Harry weren't that close. You weren't what you'd say close. Not as close, anyway, as Harry and me. I couldn't believe it, but I knew it must be true for Jack to call. I felt like I was in shock and forgot all about breakfast. I turned from one news broadcast to another until I had the story. I must have hung around an hour or so listening to the radio and getting more and more upset as I thought about Harry and what the radio was saying. There would be a lot of crummy people who wouldn't be sorry to see Harry dead, would be glad he'd bought it, in fact. His wife, for one, would be glad, though she lived in San Diego and they hadn't seen each other for 2 or 3 years. She'd be glad. She's that kind of person, from what Harry had said. She didn't want to give him the divorce for another woman. No divorce. Nothing. Now she wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. No, she wouldn't be sorry to see Harry dead. But little Judith? That's another story. I left the house after calling in at work to report off. Frank didn't say much. He said he could understand. He felt the same way, he said, but he had to keep the shop open. Harry would have wanted it that way, he said. Frank Clovey. He's the owner and shop foreman rolled into one, and the best man I've ever worked for. I got in the car and started off in the general direction of the Red Fox, a place where Harry and myself and Gene Smith and Rod Williams and Ned Clark and some of the rest of the gang hung out nights after work. It was 8:30 in the morning by then, and the traffic was heavy, so I had to keep my mind on my driving. Still, I couldn't help thinking now and then about poor Harry. Harry was an operator. That is to say, he always had something going. It was never a drag being around Harry. He was good with women, if you know what I mean. Always had money and lived high. He was sharp, too, and somehow he could always work it around so that in any deal he came out smelling like a rose. The Jag he drove, for instance. It was nearly new, a $20,000 car, but it had been wrecked in a big pileup on 101. Harry bought it for a song from the insurance company and fixed it up himself till it was like new. That's the kind of guy Harry was. Then there's this 32-foot Chris Craft cabin cruiser that Harry's uncle in LA had left Harry in his will. Harry'd only had the boat about a month. He'd just gone down to look it over and take it out for a little spin a couple of weeks ago. But there was the problem of Harry's wife, who was legally entitled to her share. To keep her from somehow getting her hands on it if she got wind of it, before he'd even laid his eyes on the boat, in fact, Harry had gone to a lawyer and worked something out so that he signed the thing over lock, stock, and pickle barrel to little Judith. The two of them had been planning to take it for a trip someplace on Harry's vacation in August. Harry had been all over, I might add. He'd been to Europe when he was in the service and had been to all the capitals and big resort cities. He'd been in a crowd once when someone took a shot at General de Gaulle. He'd been places and done things, Harry had. Now he was dead. At the Red Fox, which opens early, there was only one guy in the place. He was sitting at the other end of the bar, and he was no one I knew. Jimmy, the bartender, had the television on and nodded at me as I came in. His eyes were red, and it came home to me hard. Harry's death, when I saw Jimmy. There was an old Lucille Ball Desi Arnaz show just starting, and Jimmy took a long stick and turned the channel selector to another station. But there was nothing on right now about Harry. I can't believe it, Jimmy said, shaking his head. Anybody but Harry. I feel the same way, Jimmy, I said. Anybody but Harry. Jimmy poured us 2 stiff ones and threw his off without batting an eye. It hurts as bad as if Harry'd been my own brother. It couldn't hurt any worse. He shook his head again and stared a while at his glass. He was pretty far gone already. We'd better have another one, he said. Put a little water in mine this time, I said. A few guys, friends of Harry's, drifted in from time to time that morning. Once I saw Jimmy get out a handkerchief and blow his nose. The guy at the other end of the bar, the stranger, made a move as if to play something on the jukebox. But Jimmy went over and pulled the plug with a wild jerk and glared at the guy till he left. None of us had much to say to each other. What could we say? We were still too numb. Finally, Jimmy brought out an empty cigar box and put it on the bar. He said we'd better start a collection for a wreath. We all put in $1 or $2 to get things going. Jimmy took a grease pencil and marked Harry Fund on the box. Mike Demarest came in and took the stool next to mine. He's a bartender at the TNT Club. Cripes, he said. I heard it on the clock radio. The wife was getting dressed for work and woke me up and said, "Is that the Harry you know?" Sure as hell. Give me a double and a beer chaser, Jimmy. In a few minutes, he said, "How's little Judith taking it? Has anybody seen little Judith?" I could see he was watching me out of the corner of his eye. I didn't have anything to say to him. Jimmy said, "She called here this morning and sounded pretty hysterical. Poor kid." Another drink or two, Mike turned to me and said, "You going down to view him?" I waited for a minute before answering. I don't care much for that sort of thing. I doubt it. Mike nodded as if he understood, but a minute later, I caught him watching me in the mirror behind the bar. I might put in here that I don't like Mike Demarest, if you haven't already guessed. I have never liked him. Harry didn't like him either. We'd talked about it. But that's the way it always is. The good guy gets it, and the others go about their business. About then, I noticed my palms were getting clammy, and my insides felt like lead. At the same time, I could feel the blood pounding hard in my temples. For a minute, I thought I was going to faint. I slid off the stool, nodded at Mike, and said, "Take it easy, Jimmy." "Yeah, you too," he said. Outside, I leaned against the wall for a minute, trying to get my bearings. I remembered I hadn't eaten any breakfast. What with the anxiety and depression and the drinks I'd had, it was no wonder my head was spinning. But I didn't want to eat anything. I couldn't have eaten a bite for anything. A clock over a jewelry store window across the street said 10 to 11. It seemed like it should be late afternoon at least. So much had happened. It was at that moment I saw little Judith. She came around the corner, walking slowly, her shoulders hunched and drawn, a pinched look at her face. A pitiful sight. She had a big wad of Kleenex in her hand. She stopped once and blew her nose. "Judith," I said. She made a sound that went to my heart like a bullet. We put our arms around each other right there on the sidewalk. I said, "Judith, I'm so sorry. What can I do? I'd give my right arm." Me trying to console her, saying whatever came to mind, both of us sniffling. She let go for a minute and looked at me with a dazed look, then threw her arms around me again. I can't believe it. That's all," she said. "I just can't." She kept squeezing my shoulder with one hand and patting my back with the other. "It's true, Judith," I said. "It's on the radio and TV news, and it'll be in all the papers tonight." No, she said, squeezing me all the harder. I was beginning to get woozy again. I could feel the sun burning down on my head. She still had her arms around me. I moved just enough so that we had to pull apart. but I kept my arm around her waist to give her support. We were going away next month, she said. Last night, we sat at our table in the Red Fox for 3 or 4 hours making plans. Judith, I said, let's go someplace and have a cup of coffee or a drink. Let's go inside, she said. No, someplace else, I said. We can come back here later. I think if I ate something, I might feel better, she said. That's a good idea, I said. I could eat something. The next 3 days passed in a whirl. I went to work each day, but it was a sad and depressing place without Harry. I saw a lot of little Judith after work. I sat with her in the evenings and tried to keep her from dwelling on too many unpleasant aspects of the thing. I also took her around here and there for things she had to attend to. Twice I took her to the funeral parlor. She collapsed the first time. I wouldn't go inside the place myself. I wanted to remember poor Harry as he used to be. The day before the service, all of us at the shop chipped in $38 for a funeral spray. I was delegated to go and pick it out since I'd been close to Harry. I remembered a florist not too far from my place. So I drove home, fixed some lunch, then drove to Howard's House of Flowers. It was in this shopping center, along with a pharmacy, a barber shop, a bank, and a travel agency. I parked the car and hadn't taken more than a couple of steps when my eye was caught by this big poster in the travel agency window. I went over to the window and stood for a while. Mexico. There was this giant stone face grinning down like the sun over a blue sea filled with little sailboats that looked like white paper napkins. On the beach, women in bikinis lounged around in sunglasses or else played badminton. I looked at all the posters in the window, including those for Germany and Merry England, but I kept going back to that grinning sun, the beach, the women, the little boats. Finally, I combed my hair in the reflection from the window, straightened my shoulders, and went on to the florist's. The next morning, Frank Clovey came to work wearing slacks, white shirt, and a tie. He said if any of us wanted to go see Harry off, it was all right with him. Most of the guys went home to change, took in the funeral, and then took the rest of the afternoon off. Jimmy had set up a little buffet at the Red Fox in honor of Harry. He had different kinds of dip, potato chips, and sandwiches. I didn't go to the funeral, but I did drop by the Red Fox later in the afternoon. Little Judith was there, sure. She was dressed up and moving around the place like she'd had a heavy dose of shell shock. Mike Demarest was there too, and I could see him looking her over from time to time. She went from one guy to another talking about Harry and saying things like, Harry thought the world of you, Gus. Or Harry would have wanted it that way. Or Harry would have liked that part best. Harry was just that sort. 2 or 3 guys hugged her and patted her on the hips and carried on so that I almost had to ask them to leave off. A few old pods drifted in, guys that probably hadn't exchanged a dozen words with Harry in his life, if he'd ever even laid eyes on them, and said what a tragedy it was and threw down beer and sandwiches. Little Judith and I stayed around till the place emptied out around 7. Then I took her home. You probably guessed some of the rest of the story by now. Little Judith and I started keeping company after Harry's death. We went to the movies nearly every night and then to a bar or else to her place. We only went back to the Red Fox once, and then we decided to not go there anymore, but to go to new places instead, places where she and Harry had never been. One Sunday, not long after the funeral, the 2 of us went out to Golden Gate Cemetery to put a pot of flowers on Harry's grave. But they hadn't put his marker in yet, so we spent an hour looking for it, and we're still not able to find the goddamn grave. Little Judith kept running around from one spot to another, calling, "Here it is, here it is." But the plot always turned out to belong to somebody else. We finally left, both of us feeling depressed. In August, we drove down to LA to have a look at the boat. It was a fine piece of work. Harry's uncle had kept it in prime shape, and Thomas, The Mexican who looked after it said he wouldn't be afraid to take it around the world. Little Judith and I just looked at it and then looked at each other. It's seldom anything turns out to be better than you expected it to be. Usually it's the other way around. But that's the way it was with this boat, better than anything we dreamed. On our way back to San Francisco, we decided to take it on a little cruise the next month. And so we set out on our trip in September. A lot of things have changed since Harry's death. Even little Judith is out of the picture now, gone in a way that is tragic and still has me wondering. It was somewhere off the Baja coast that it happened. Little Judith, who couldn't swim a stroke, came up missing. We figured she fell overboard during the night. What was she doing up on deck so late, or what caused her to fall overboard? Neither Thomas nor I know. All we know is that the next morning she was gone, and neither of us saw anything or heard her cry out. She simply disappeared. That is the truth, so help me, and what I told the police when we put in at Guymos a few days later. My wife, I told them, for luckily we'd married just before leaving San Francisco. It was to have been our honeymoon trip. I said things have changed since Harry's death. Now here I am in Mazatlan, and Thomas is showing me some of the sights, things you never thought existed back in the States. Our next stop is Manzanillo, Thomas's hometown, then Acapulco. We intend to keep going until the money runs out, then put in and work for a while, then set out again. It occurs to me that what I'm doing, the things the way Harry would have wanted. But who can tell about that now? Sometimes I think I was born to be a rover. Raymond Carver. What's that called? After Harry? Harry's Death. Raymond Carver from a book, Fires. That was Harry's Death. This is Frankenstein Tea. I hope everybody enjoyed. I hope you have a great afternoon. And I'll see you here tomorrow at 3 o'clock for another short story. Peace. Bye, Dad.